Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to keep it very light this week, very loose, kind of a loosey-goosey episode. I thought of this while driving. It seems that while I'm in the car, that's when my brain works best. Of course, there's all sorts of research that when you actually sit down to think of something, it's sometimes not as effective as when you're in a more relaxed or different environment. So my entire outline for this episode is basically 4 bullet points that I jotted down on a Post-it. I usually have a more sort of OCD organized outline. This show isn't scripted. As you know, the only time I might script something is an intro for a high profile guest, something like that. So I'm sort of walking a tightrope without a net for this episode, so to speak, but that's okay because everything is kind of fresh in my mind. This week is a follow-up to episode 30, Dubious Study Plans, if you want to check that out, sort of a follow-up. And I want to discuss some of these trendy chess improvement tips that are out there. As you will see, I really don't agree with any of them. I'm not really going to use the terms right and wrong. It's going to be more of an agree-disagree type of thing because I'm just one person. I'm just one voice. Don't go by me. Get other viewpoints. Nothing I'm saying is Bible. I'm just basing this on my own experience as a player and someone who runs an amateur chess club and sees this type of stuff week in and week out. Before we get into that, some very quick housekeeping and a few reminders. We do have a Patreon page if you're interested in supporting the show. And one thing I forgot to mention a few weeks ago in the season premiere, we also have a Buy Me a Coffee page. Now, the difference between those two, Patreon is for recurring support for a very low monthly fee. You get a couple of perks. And Buy Me a Coffee is for one-time support. If you just kind of want to do a one-off type of thing, that is available as well. So 2 different support platforms, depending on what you want, if you're interested in that. I'm not going to say more about it now, because those links are in the show notes. So anyone who's interested or wants further information can check those out. Couple of other things. There are going to be guests this season. Not to worry. I know the original intent of this podcast, which really is most of it, are my solo episodes and my own thoughts on my own journey. But I do have some guests lined up. I have 3 so far. It's just a question of, I was going to say us, of me really, organizing a recording date and just researching a few things and touching base on topic ideas, because I do sort of agree with the guest beforehand, so to speak, on topic ideas. I don't want anyone to sort of be caught off guard. I don't discuss specific questions with my guests, but more general topics, sort of a bullet point list, just some disclosure on how I work. But the thing is with guests, and I'm not complaining in any way, shape, or form, it is a lot of work. There's a lot of administrative work, and with scheduling, it's just much more of a process. Whereas with my solo episodes, I can pretty much get an idea and just record whenever I want. But of course, just with work and family stuff and some graduate school things I'm finishing up, it's just been hard to schedule guests, and I don't want to have a guest on unless I feel I'm fully prepared, out of respect for the show itself and the guest. But that will be coming up. We will have guests. I don't know exactly when, but it's in the works. So as far as these trendy chess improvement tips or this trendy chess improvement advice that's out there, this is going to be, of course, a highly subjective episode. Again, it's based on my own personal journey. I'm just one person. And the theme is, I'm sharing, I'm not telling. Okay, I'm not saying this is how it is. I'm not using right or wrong. If I use the terms right or wrong or good or bad, then that's inadvertent. That's not my intent. I'm simply sharing my point of view, not telling. You can ultimately take the info and decide for yourself. Now, something about context, which is very important. I know we have players of all levels who listen to the show, which I'm very grateful for, very appreciative of, but this episode is really intended for advanced beginners looking to move to intermediate level, which I'm guessing is many of you out there. So to quantify it, and again, these are very loose numbers, I would say if you're rated around USCF 1,000, 1,100-ish, and you're looking to get to 1,400-ish, like Class C, that's who this is geared for. If you're rated much higher, let's say you're already 16, 17, 1,800, some of this may not apply to you, but I urge you to still listen because I'm sure a lot of this you'll find interesting, or there may be some parts that are relevant. But I just want to be clear about who the target audience is, because certain chess improvement advice I don't believe is universal. And there's a lot of advice out there for players in that category that I described, right? Those, say, 1,000 players, adult beginners looking to get to, say, 1,400. There's a lot of advice out there that I feel is not appropriate. Again, I'm not going to say that's wrong, but in my opinion, I don't think it's going to help you at that level. And I'm going to speak about those in a moment, but I just wanted to be clear on the context. So there are four main or four broad areas or four broad suggestions for improvement that I question. I question their effectiveness and their appropriateness for the category of players that I mentioned. Now, the first thing that I hear as far as improvement is that you should study the classic games and classic game collection books. Games from like Tal, Philidor, Lasker, Nimzovich, books like My System by Nimzovich, or even something like My 60 Most Memorable Games by Fischer, maybe even something like The Art of Attack. I'm just kind of spitballing off the top of my head, excuse me. And I don't think that that's really going to help you. Now, if you're already a bit higher rated, then I believe those game collections will help you. But if you're in a phase where you're still making elementary blunders, you're still hanging pieces, you're missing basic tactical ideas, you're still very weak on positional play, things like that, looking at those classic game collections, I don't believe that's going to help you. It might be interesting. There might be parts of it maybe that you get, but I don't think it's going to help you clean up your mistakes. And I think that needs to come later. I've given this speech before. If you're still hanging pieces, you shouldn't be reading something like My System. Okay, if you're missing tactical shots and dropping pawns, I don't think reading Fischer's My 60 Most Memorable Games is going to help you, or looking at some game collection of Tal's best games or something like that. You don't need that yet. That's not going to help you yet. You'll get there. But for right now, that's not going to help you. And I'm not going to say avoid it. I just think there are better ways for you to spend your time. You should be focusing on studying your games, working on basic tactics, working on your thought process, really analyzing your mistakes. Because again, the first thing you need to do, the most fundamental thing to improve, you have to stop the elementary blunders, right? The hanging of the pieces, the simple 1 to 3 move tactical sequences, missing like basic mates, missing like a back rank mate, missing a mate and 2, all that stuff. You got to clean that up first. If that's an issue, you shouldn't be looking at a game collection of Lasker or something like that. You're not ready for that yet. So that's my take on looking at these classic games. Again, let's not forget the context. I'm talking about players rated around 1,000 or so, looking to get to that sort of intermediate 1,400-ish range. I don't think those books are appropriate yet. The next thing was a bit of a shock to me when I heard it. I don't agree with it. And it was suggested by an international master, someone I respect a lot. I enjoy listening to this person's content, but I was a bit surprised. And he suggested that for amateurs, that you should not use a chess engine when analyzing your games. Now, again, I'm not going to use right and wrong. He's an he's a titled player. I'm just an amateur. So let's understand that context. But I have to say, despite him being a titled player, I don't agree with that at all. It is my firm contention that reviewing your games with an engine is one of the most fundamentally important things you can do as a player. Even if you're rated way above 1,000, even if you're like a 15, 16, 1,700 player, something like that, even if you're 2,000 or above, reviewing your games with an engine is absolutely essential to improvement. That's where you should probably be spending most of your time, in fact, is analyzing your tournament games. That is the most important thing. So when he said that amateurs shouldn't use an engine, I was just really surprised. Now, there might be some more context to that he didn't express. Maybe he feels people are going to use it as a shortcut, but you have to know where you went wrong. You can certainly analyze your games on your own without an engine, but then you got to check it with an engine. Like, how are you going to know where you made your mistakes if you're not aware of what they are? And when I say use an engine, I don't mean just look at your blunders and that's it. You really need to look at the whole game from top to bottom, try other lines. Maybe during the game, you were thinking of doing this or that. Even if you didn't play it, even if what you played was the best move, you should still explore those lines, even though you know, I should say, that they're quote unquote wrong. You should still explore them because, that's how you learn. I do that all the time. Like, oh, here I played knight f6 check, but I was thinking of playing h4 here. Like, what would have happened if I did that? Try to analyze it in your head and then put it in the engine. That's how you learn. You have to analyze your game with an engine. I just fundamentally disagree with that suggestion because one of the top things you can do to improve is, again, study your games with an engine. I just think it's so important. I think it's completely incorrect to tell amateurs not to use a chess engine. Now, yes, you need to use it properly. I mean, I'll say that much. It's certainly not going to help you if you use an engine incorrectly. Now, how do you use an engine incorrectly? If you only look at that one move where you hung a piece, or if you don't look at the whole game, if you don't really explore it, you need to spend some time. I'm not saying you need to spend 5 hours on every game, but you should spend a good amount of time going through it. And what's going to happen is as you keep your games in a chess engine in some type of database, you're going to see patterns and things where you keep making mistakes. And if you play the same openings, which is what I recommend, you're going to start to become stronger because you'll understand the themes and the patterns and the positions. You'll use less time on your clock. Basically, in short, I completely disagree about the suggestion that you should not use an engine. Next thing that's floating out there, and this is a big one, is the idea that you have to come up with this regimented and sort of OCD daily study plan. I do not agree with that. I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think most improvers who have jobs and families and responsibilities, etc., are going to be able to stick to it. Now, I'm reminded of a book that I'm currently reading. It's called Willpower by Roy Baumeister and John Tierney. It's called Willpower. I'll link it in the show notes. I highly recommend it. Just as a side note, I love that narrative nonfiction, that sort of pop psychology, Malcolm Gladwell, Daniel Pink, Adam Grant, all that stuff. And in Willpower, they discuss how having daily plans, daily regimented study plans for anything, not just chess, they're just saying in general, how having a daily plan is often ineffective because we don't stick to it. Now, I just want to say, one of you, a listener, recommended Willpower to me. I know I emailed you back a while ago saying that I was going to read it. I'm reading it now, absolutely loving it. I'm about halfway through it, And for some reason, I lost the email after I sent it. So I wanted to shout out that person by name. I apologize that I lost the email, but great recommendation on willpower. And I do love my books. I'm the type of person, no matter how busy I am, I have to have a book that I'm currently reading, even if it takes me a while to get through it. If someone asks me, hey, Neil, what book are you currently reading? I'm one of those people where I have to have an answer for that. But Willpower, fantastic book. I highly recommend it if you're into that. And I want to read you a quote about daily study plans and about sort of daily routines and why they're often ineffective. This is directly from Willpower. Daily plans do have the advantage of letting the person know exactly what he or she should be doing at each moment, but their preparation is time-consuming because it takes much longer to make 30 daily plans than a broad plan for the month without any daily details. Another drawback of daily plans is that they lack flexibility. They deprive the person of the chance to make choices along the way, so the person feels locked into a rigid and grinding sequence of tasks. Life rarely goes exactly according to plan, and so the daily plans can be demoralizing as soon as you fall off schedule. Now that's a great line. And as I'm reading this book, there are so many parallels to chess and learning, but that's what it made me think of. It's almost like when you plan on going to the gym as a New Year's resolution, 80% of people end up not going to the gym when they start it as a New Year's resolution or something like that, because it's simply impossible to keep up a regular schedule of going. If you have a job, if you have a family, things come up, life happens. So that quote from Willpower, I think, is a great example of why these daily study plans often don't work for many adult improvers. Now, along these same lines, I want to share something that was shared on Twitter, or X as they now call it, by Alex King, FIDE Master Alex King. He's now a FIDE Master. He was a National Master when he was on this podcast. Alex shared on X this post from Reddit that's sort of a satire, or, kind of bust chops about adult improvers. It's very, very funny. I want to read it. It's all in good fun, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So here it is. So this is the title of the post on Reddit: How to Cope with Playing an Adult Improver. I have a chess tournament in 6 days, and I anticipate getting paired with an adult improver. I can picture them sitting across the board from me before the game, smugly reviewing their 5-year study plan, book hierarchy, and Lichess opening statistics. How can I cope with this and maybe even accept it? Are there tournaments only for non-chess punks? Very, very funny stuff. And I believe I retweeted it on my Twitter feed. Very, very funny. But there is some truth to that, right? Because, who has the 5-year study plans, right? The adult improvers. Who has the fancy bookshelf with all, a zillion chess books, and they're posting pictures of it on social media? The adult improvers. Who's buying books, 5, 10, 12 at a clip on Amazon? The adult improvers. And at the end, when he says, are there tournaments only for non-chess punks? For those of you who may not be aware, chess punks, I think I'm getting this right, it's a group of adult improvers on X or Twitter who basically discuss chess improvement and their journey. And, it's a good community. I've seen some of their posts, but that's what chess punks refer to, in case some of you may not be on X, just so you know. But very, very funny quote. It's all in good fun. I got a good laugh out of that. Now, along these same lines, as far as creating study plans, there's a book that came out a couple of years ago, 2021, I believe. It's by Dvorin Kuljasevic. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It's called How to Study Chess on Your Own, Creating a Plan That Works and Sticking to It. I don't know if the Creating a Plan That Works and Sticking to It, if that's the subtitle, but it's on the cover. Anyway, How to Study Chess on Your Own. You may have heard of it. It's being talked about a lot. I do have a copy. I have some thoughts on it. Now, I don't want to turn this episode into a review of how to study chess on your own. I'm going to give you my opinion. It's way too advanced for most adult improvers. If you're rated, again, the context of this episode, if you're rated about 1,000 or so, you're sort of an advanced beginner-ish improver, like that category. This is going to be way too intense for you. And even if you look at his suggestions, he kind of starts at a rating range of 1,500 in one of the chapters where he talks about material. Now, I just want to be clear. The book is very well written. I'm not saying it's a bad book. Don't misquote me. It's actually a very good book. It's very well written, very organized. I'm just saying it's probably too difficult for most people listening to this. And if you're rated, I would say below 1,400, it's just going to be way too intense and really overwhelming. That's not a criticism. That's just a description and an observation. It's very, very overwhelming if you're sort of lower rated. I think once you're about 1,500 and above, then this book is appropriate. So if you're still committing those elementary blunders and things like we spoke about, you're not there yet for this book. Again, it's not a bad book. I just think it's too over the top. And I'm just going to speak about it in very broad strokes. I'm mentioning this book only because I did pick up a copy a few years ago, and it kind of ties into my disagreement with this idea that you have to have this very regimented daily study plan. With How to Study Chess on Your Own, it's really if you want to get to 2,200 and beyond. That's my take. And again, I've mentioned this before many times in the discourse on improvement. It's all about getting a titled rating, like getting to 2,200 and above, right? That's what chess improvement is for many people. That's how it's defined. You either get to 2,200 or maybe 2,000 and beyond, or you've failed. Whereas they'll be dismissive. Let's say you're rated 1,200 and you get to 1,400. That's a huge improvement. But it seems for many people, well, it doesn't matter unless you get to 2,200. I feel that that's what this book is geared for, people who really want to get 2,200 and above. So if you're just looking to improve as kind of an adult beginner, there's really too much in this for you. Again, it's very intense. It's very overwhelming. And here's the thing, and this is probably my biggest criticism of the book. The study schedules he has in the back of the book has no bearing to reality, assuming that you're the typical adult improver. You're working full time, you have like a real world day job. Maybe you have a couple of kids, you have a spouse or a partner, you have household responsibilities. I mean, there's things in here where it's like 30 hours a week of study. It's just, you're not going to be able to do it. Now, to be fair, because someone could say, well, Neil, you just said yourself, he didn't really intend it for that crowd. It's intended for people 1,500 and above. Yes, but I'm saying that for two reasons. Because based on things I've seen out there about this book, there are people in that rating range considering getting it, and some people think they should. You can do what you want. Don't go by me. I'm just saying I think it's going to be a little too difficult for you. And the other thing is, even for people that this is intended for, let's say you're already rated 1,500 or 1,600, again, the study schedules in the back, there's no way you're going to be able to maintain them. Like I said, if you look at his sample plans in the back of the book, it's completely through the roof as far as the amount of hours he wants you to put in, and in the structure of it. I just don't think anyone's going to stick to it. Now, if you're in a situation where for whatever reason, I mean, there's no, judgment here. I don't, everyone's situation is different. If you have an inordinate amount of time to put in, then check it out. If you really, really have trouble organizing yourself, even creating a basic study plan, then maybe you could check it out and you could just use certain parts of it. Now, to be fair, you could take his study plan and sort of tailor it to your own needs, especially if you have limited study time, which is most of us. I mean, you'd really have to chop it down. But again, very good book, very well written. But the thing is, it's really, really overwhelming. That's all I'm saying. It's like really intense. I mean, even when I read it now, at this point, I was like, whoa. I mean, it's a lot of information. But I just wanted to mention it because that book is being talked about. It's very popular. And again, I want to be clear. It's a good book. It's well written. I'm just saying for most improvers who are like in that sort of advanced beginner phase, I just don't think it's appropriate for you. I think you need to wait. That's just my opinion. You do what you want to do. If you want to check it out, I think it's a little too intense. All right. So the fourth thing I would like to speak about as far as these trendy chess improvement suggestions is the idea that the key to success lies in opening study, that it's all about the openings, specifically that you need to memorize certain lines. Completely not true. Here's my take on the openings. You need to develop an opening repertoire that works for you and stick with it. I'm not going to go into the details about choosing an opening repertoire. I've spoken about that before, but you need to find an opening repertoire that works for you and that you can stick with. Stay with the same openings. That's the way to do it, because as you get comfortable, because you're not jumping around, you can then spend less time on the opening and work on other things. As you get stronger, maybe once you're over 1800, if you feel you need to mix up your opening repertoire, you'll be a strong enough player by then that you can do that. But remember, and I've said this, even someone at the level of Bobby Fischer, he pretty much stuck with the same openings. And, he was a GM, one of the greatest players ever, right? He played E4 as white against D4. He played the King's Indian against E4. He played the Knight off Sicilian. And he very rarely deviated from that. And that was Fischer. So just something to sort of chew on there. And I think what's happening with a lot of improvers, they're getting these courses and looking at these videos on openings, and they're, memorizing lines and they feel good about it. And then two things happen at the club. Number one, they try to force a line that they learned because they're dying to play it, and that's what they studied all week, but it doesn't fit the position. They're trying to kind of shove a round peg into a square hole. Did I say that right? I always mess these up. You get the idea. They try to force an opening in a position or in a context where it doesn't fit. Well, because, that's what I've been spending time on. And then they lose the game. Or even if they don't do that, most of the time at the club, it's going to go out of book so quickly anyway that it doesn't matter. It's very rare at the club you're going to play this book line that you memorize and it's going to go like 20 moves deep. That almost never happens. It's more important that you understand the general ideas of the opening. Let me give a broad example. Against D4, like if I play Knight F6, a lot of times what I'm seeing now is white will do something different or odd. Instead of D4, Knight F6, C4, I mean, of course you'll see that too, but I'll see like D4, Knight F6, and then something weird. And so right away, you have to, and because I play the Queen's Indian and the Nimzo, I kind of just do an offshoot of that, but I know enough about the positional ideas that I can sort of respond to my opponent and come up with a plan. But that's not from memorizing specific lines. That's from sticking with the same openings. And when I get hit with these sort of oddball responses, it's happened enough that I know what to do. Now, if I were experimenting with many, many different openings, that becomes a lot more difficult. So yes, the opening is important, but it shouldn't be where you're spending most of your time. And a classic example was when National Master Nick Figueredo was on the podcast, friend of mine. He comes to the Long Island Chess Club once in a while. He lives here on Long Island. He said that there were two players at the club, both rated about 800 or so, and they were going back and forth about how much Caro-Kann theory they knew. Whereas meanwhile, if they're rated 800, there's issues with tactics and hanging pieces and the basics. This is something you see all the time, where there's just this overemphasis on openings. Let me give an example of this podcast, okay? This is episode, 85, 84? I'm looking at my recording software right now. I don't have it in front of me. Anyway, whatever episode this is, of all my episodes, you know which ones have the biggest download numbers? Take a guess. The ones that deal with openings. More than my Grandmaster guests, more than really any guest, anything having to do with openings, the downloads skyrocket. It's very, very interesting. And even on YouTube, if you look at videos on openings, they're through the roof, right? Because you'll see like a clickbait YouTube title. I spoke about this last week. Play this one opening forever as black. Play this one opening to get to 2,000 instantly. And people click on those. Thousands and thousands of views. People love openings. And don't get me wrong, it's interesting and it's important, but it's just funny how that's where the emphasis is. And like I said, if you're still in that phase, again, hanging pieces, missing basic tactics, all that thing where you're kind of still developing as a player as far as the basics, you don't want to obsess with openings. Find openings that you like. Know exactly what you're going to play against E4, against D4, against C4, and just stick with it. Stick with it. And as you analyze your games in the engine, you'll see patterns and, you're going to get stronger that way. But I think there's too much of an emphasis on openings. So just to recap this week, there were 4 ideas as far as suggestions for improvement that I don't agree with for advanced beginners rated around 1,000 or 1,200 looking to get to that sort of intermediate average club player level, maybe around 1,400. I think a lot of these are better once you're over, say, 1,500 or 1,600. Again, these are very loose numbers, but just to kind of give you some parameters. And again, the first thing is that you should study classic games and classic game collections. I don't think that's appropriate at this stage. I don't think it's going to help you. The second suggestion, that you should not use a chess engine as an amateur player, I could not disagree more. I think it's one of the most fundamentally important things that you can do. On the weeks where I'm really, really tight for time, which has been a lot lately, I'll do my little Puzzle Rush thing real quick. And then my one thing, remember I talked about my Puzzle Rush +1 study plan? My one thing is often reviewing my tournament games with an engine, because it makes me feel, like I'm still in the game, so to speak, no pun intended. Studying your games with an engine, I feel, is crucial. Just my take. Again, I'm not going to use right or wrong, but I disagree with that suggestion. The third thing is the idea that you have to have these regimented and very strict sort of OCD study plans. I don't think they're realistic. I don't think you're going to stick to it. And I think it's going to take the joy out of studying chess. I mean, yes, you're studying chess, but it shouldn't be sort of a no pain, no gain thing. You should enjoy the process. And then the fourth thing is the idea that the key to success lies in the openings. Openings are certainly important, but I think they're overemphasized for many beginners and improvers. A lot of people think the key to success is to just memorize opening lines. I gave you my whole take on that. You need to stick with the same repertoire, understand the main ideas and main themes, because most of what you study as far as memorizing lines and a lot of these book moves and these deep book lines, you're not going to see them at the club. It's going to deviate very quickly. What I'm noticing, at least where I am, at least in my world, on the island, and sometimes when I play online, but I haven't played online in a while. I usually go online for study materials, but people seem to be deviating earlier from book lines more and more. So something to keep in mind, it's more about understanding the board itself and the general principles rather than memorizing a lot of opening theory, which some people think is the way to do it. A lot of people think, well, I'm rated 1,000. I want to get to 1,800, so I just have to memorize as many opening lines as possible. It's a lot more than that. So as always, I really appreciate you listening. Quick reminder, if you do want to support the show, you can check out Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, 2 different platforms depending on the level of support you want to give. If you're interested, have a wonderful day, everybody, and I hope you win your next game.